Welcome to Old Path and our study through the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. We get to chapter 6, so we're getting close to being halfway through with the book. And we're going to get some more detail, I guess you can say, about the opposition from names that we've already heard before. The two most prominent are Sanballat and Tobiah. And Tobiah is actually kind of singled out here more so than Sanballat. And so here's one of those things, and it comes in towards the end, or at the end of the chapter. I guess it would be a good thing for anybody who professes to be a believer to remember something really, really important. You can have victory over what the enemy may want to do to you. And when I say the enemy, I mean the devil, and in the spiritual sense. He's always wanting to do things to trip us up and then create, if you will, that tension that sin brings about, and anything that he can do to get us off of our walk with the Lord. Anything that he can do. So with all that as being something that's understood, if that is his prime objective, and we have victory in some particular area, and we thank God for helping us through whatever the temptation was, or whatever the trap that was set that we don't fall into because God opened our eyes to it, whatever the case may be, we want to remember that the devil will not be defeated in that and just think, oh, well, I couldn't get over on him this time, so I'm just going to go ahead and give up. He'll never give up. He'll just start something else. And so this is kind of a case study in that. And these same antagonists are brought up over and over and over again. And what we have in front of us is, again, just a brand new thing that they concoct. It'll have a bit of a familiar sound to it. Because remember, in the back of everybody's mind, especially the people that would want to stand in opposition, if they couldn't defeat them directly, and it just makes sense, probably the fastest way to bring all of this to a screeching halt, considering that the king of Persia is the one who authorized all of this to happen, get the king of Persia to believe that somehow the very person that he sent, in this case Nehemiah, is actually working against him and has intention of rebelling against him. And so that would be something that if I'm the opposition that's here, we always have that as kind of like the trump card to play if we could just convince the king that this is the issue. Now, ever since the time of Ezra, as we looked at this, Ezra didn't want anything, just like Nehemiah did, from the nation of Persia, other than to be able to go back. It was God who was ultimately sending them back anyway, but God gave them favor in the eyes of those kings, and the kings underwrote a huge amount of this. Now, let's remember something else as well. Because of the trusted position that Nehemiah would have had in Persia, he has a very prominent position here also in Jerusalem. And so, yes, does he answer to the king? Yeah, the answer is obvious, he does. But he's also somebody who has to be given a great deal of trust by the king, or else none of this would have been able to take place. So there's a kind of a question that pops up in this, and I know that I've addressed it before, but it really is kind of, I think, a spiritual truth that's in this. And why is the opposition so heavy? Why is it so oppressive that all that they're looking to do, these are people who have been displaced from the land, starting with Nebuchadnezzar. They've been gone for a very, very long time, over and above their 70 years of their captivity, since Zerubbabel has come back, and then on to Ezra and now Nehemiah. It's way over 100 years since they were first taken captive. So it's a very significant amount of time. So with all of that being said, they want to come back to their land, and they've been able to do it in waves. Of course, what Ezra found when he got there was distressing to him, in the sense that the people began to intermarry once again, and he brought that to a halt. But we see that once that snowballs and begins to take place, it has real potential, I guess you could say, political ramifications, and we see that here as we will get to in the last part of the chapter. So with that being said, the opposition, as I mentioned before, has a couple of different possibilities, and you may even come up with a different one yourself. But if nothing else, if it's just a matter of power and position, both Sanballat and Tobiah, among many others that are spoken of here, some directly, some indirectly, would see this is a power thing. How can we get rid of Nehemiah? He's got too much power. He's not doing the things that we want to see done, and so there's that opposition. And that could have there could be very real truth to that. But I think in the bigger issue of this is the devil's absolute hatred for the children of Israel. Now, some would take it a step further than that, is that if the devil could somehow eradicate the people of Israel, then in the mind of the devil, if this is how the theory goes, get rid of all the line that comes from Abraham, and you can get rid of the line to the Messiah. And so there are people who believe that that's been the motivation, because there have been a number of attempts, most recently the one that we had during World War II, to eradicate the children of Israel, the ones who are there, the Jewish people. We have those in our world today that would love to see that take place. We hear them from time to time in Iran speaking about such things, and in all of the kind of radical Muslim communities. So with that being said, the interesting thing that we stop to consider here is every attempt to try to thwart the work has failed, but it doesn't mean that they're going to give up, because the person I ultimately believe pulling their strings is not giving up either. Do I believe that these people are possessed Satanists and everything else? I don't go that far, but I can believe this because I see it in my world today all the time. People are manipulated because they're not governed by God. They're governed by the devil, but it doesn't mean that they're devoted to him. They just do his bidding, and they might not even realize it. So is that what this is with Sanballat and Tobiah? Potentially. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't change the narrative at all. These were the people that were stirred up at the time. They have a great deal of following, and they have really entrenched themselves into that particular society that really has not completely undergone all of the changes that should have been taking place at the behest of Ezra. So now Nehemiah is here. Remember again, his task, first and foremost, the only thing that he was sent there to do initially was to rebuild the walls and fortify the city, make it a place that's safe for the inhabitants. So the walls and everything were absolutely destroyed from Nebuchadnezzar's time, and so it was their intention to build the wall back up, make it a place that was defensible, and then also, as we get here, about the only thing left to do is just hang the gates, but they complete the wall within 2 months, which is a pretty amazing thing when you stop to consider if it was in that state of decay and you're working manually with just what you have with your hands and whatever they would have had for how do they move these things. This was all done in a matter of 2 months, but we're talking about 3,000 years ago, or about more like 26, 20, 25, let's call it 2,500 years. So it's not like a kind of a public works now. And so I've been to the city, I've seen it. And so the idea that you could rebuild walls even with modern technology would be pretty impressive to do in 2 months. Imagine doing it all manual labor. But it gives you an idea, again, how they stayed on task. They were not distracted in any way. And it was a massive work entailing countless people, because the urgency of the matter really took precedence, and you can see why, because there were people scheming behind the scenes here. One last thing, and I'll try to point it out, but as you read these things, or if you go back and read it after the study yourself, you'll notice that Nehemiah here, and you could tell that this is written after the events, because Nehemiah will mix the straight historical narrative, here's what happened, and then there are those times when he puts in his own personal commentary about the motivations as to why they did that. So there's a mixture of those things, and I'll try to point them out. But if you're thinking with that in your mind, that he would be speaking about here is what happened, and then throwing in his own commentary to kind of explain what was motivations behind it. And so that there's a lot of that in this chapter here. So chapter 6 is where we are. Let's turn there and let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much that we can come to your word. There are some very, very important things that we should learn from this, and as we take the time to study your word, that we would not just become people who are familiar with the history of Nehemiah and with your children Israel, but more importantly, and in addition to all of that knowledge of the history, is what are the reasons why we would know that, And so we give you all thanks and pray that you would glorify yourself through the teaching of your word, and that we would be attentive. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, if you were watching me pray and you saw me kind of jolt and wince, it's because my cat walked in as I'm praying and rubbed up against my leg, so it kind of freaked me out. Oh my goodness. Well, anyway, chapter 6. This is what happens when I'm, just kind of upstairs in a recording studio, and not when I was sitting behind the pulpit of a church where I wouldn't have a cat walk in the room. So chapter 6, that little bit of personal stuff I hope is kind of comical to you. So chapter 6. Now, it happened when Sanballat and Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of the enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, that there were no breaks left in it, though at the time I had not hung the doors in the gates. So he gives, from his own personal perspective, the people who were there as his adversaries and what had been taking place up to that point. But he sees the same people who have been trying to do the same things over and over and over again. He mentions 3 of the most prominent. 2 of them are very familiar to us. Even in just the first 5 chapters before the one that we're studying, these are names that we're familiar with. So with that being said, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come and let us meet and gather among the villages in the plain of Ono." But they thought to do me harm. So come to us where we are. And so just outside the city, come to where we are gathering up, actually a little bit outside the city, quite a ways away from the city where they would have been, best we can tell. There's not consensus necessarily of exactly where they would have been going. Most importantly, though, it says, but they thought to do me harm. So that's him putting in his commentary after the fact. The pretense was, there's tension, there are some things that we need to get worked out, so why don't you come to us and let's see if we can work these things out. See, again, Nehemiah doesn't have a problem here. He's not conflicted. He doesn't care that there's disagreement from their side. They're of no relevance to him. He doesn't care. He's already told them, you have no part in this. You have no part in this now. You have no heritage with us going back. So whatever you want to do or say or whatever, your input is not even welcomed. I don't care. I don't want to meet with you. But yet they're insistent, and he's not playing the game. He's not trying to be the diplomat. He's not trying to do anything else. He's basically saying, I have an option. I can go to you people who are irrelevant to me and who have been subversive from the time that I got here, and I could go and do all that and prevent and slow down the work that's going on, or I can complete my work. So it's a pretty obvious answer that he's going to give to them, and he does. So I sent messengers to him saying, I am doing a great work, and so that I cannot come down. Why should the work then cease while I leave it and go down to you? So this is a matter of priorities. Why would I do this? It's very practical. I can do one of 2 things. I can go and do whatever it is that you're asking me to do, or I can stay here on task, the reason why I'm here in the first place. So to you and me, as we're reading this, it's obvious. So clearly he doesn't have time for them, doesn't want to, isn't really interested with interacting with them. They're of no relevance to him. And again, like I've mentioned, he's already said that from the very beginning. He's been saying that to them. So this is his question. Why would I possibly do that? Just to come to you to satisfy you? Well, you're going to see that not only do they have another, card to play or one up their sleeve, whatever you want to say, they try this simple thing. Looks like they just would have killed him if he had gone. And it doesn't work, so they're going to up the ante. They're going to, do. Why am I using all of these card references? I don't even play cards. But anyway, they're going to try it, and they're going to escalate the issue. I'm going to get a whole lot of email on this, or probably people just commenting on the YouTube channel. I'm not going to edit this stuff out because to me it's kind of a little bit comical. So anyway, verse 4. So they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. So the repetition for this, why it's so important to them, why they keep doing this, thinking somehow he's going to change his mind, is just kind of odd. But he just says, look, nothing's changed. So here is where there's the escalation, and we get it here in verse 5. So Sanballat sent his servant to me, as before, the 5th time with an open letter in his hand. and that letter is the one that would be being sent by threat. This is what, if you don't come to us like I have said, then we are going to we're going to go forward with this, and we're going to send this back to the king in Persia. So here's what it is. It is reported among the nations and Geshem. So Geshem is the one person that's referred to as the Arab. So though you have Sanballat and Tobiah who lived in the area, and who, in Tobiah's case, had already married into some of the genealogy, some of the people that were returned with Zerubbabel. They have, I guess you could say, kind of, they've been there. This is kind of a place that they're familiar with. This Geshem seems to be, since he's mentioned as an Arab, either that he doesn't see it as being a land that he lives in, or he's not from there originally. There's a couple of different views that you could have with this, but he's mentioned and singled out a little bit differently than the other guys. So this is the way of dropping one name of, here's what's being said among the nations in our area, and Geshem has, if you will, put his stamp of approval that this is what's being spoken of, because apparently he must be in and out of the area. So it's a fabrication. It's a complete lie. Of course, it's not true. But remember, whether they had ever intended to send this letter or not, that wasn't really what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do was entrap Nehemiah and to kill him. They looked to do him harm, as it says. So clearly doing him harm, the best way to do that would be to get rid of him. So it says, this again from Sanballat, Tobiah, they're sending this off. This is the threat. Here's the letter that we're going to send if you don't come to us. So it's been reported among the nations and Geshem, and he says that you and the Jews plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall that you may be their king. So here's the report. So when this gets back to the king in Persia there, this is how it would sound. Let's just think about this. He reads this. This would be Artaxerxes, if it's read to him, that Nehemiah that you took compassion on and sent back there, he had these ulterior motives, and here's what they are. He was going to go back and rebuild the walls so as to make it a fortification. He was going to get the people behind him and then make himself king and begin a rebellion against you, King Artaxerxes. Goes on, and that here, in addition to that, you have also appointed prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king, so come therefore and let us consult together. Basically, come to us as we have said these previous 4 times, or else we're sending this letter off. So again, remember, Nehemiah is back in the land, has fortified Jerusalem. He wants to be the king. They're going to make him the king. He has prophets that are proclaiming that he's going to be the king, and he's ultimately going to rebel against you directly and look to reestablish the kingdom of Israel. Basically, that's the report that's there. Now, the point is, we've already told you where to find us. Come to us or else we send this letter. That's the ultimatum. Well, in verse 8, so I sent to him, and here's what I said. No such thing as you say are being done. No such things as you say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. Interesting. And so what's the difference? Why do I believe that it's an important thing that he mentions heart and not mind? Yeah, I believe that absolutely. Because again, if you're looking for motivations, the mind is what concocts the scheme, if you will, but it only comes from a heart that is intent on doing wicked and evil things. So the mind gets engaged once the heart is so corrupt and wants nothing more than to damage the people, and in this case, kill Nehemiah. I believe what they want to do is ultimately kill him. So that's what's in their heart. Then they would do whatever they need to do, putting it into place. Again, the mind would be, okay, how do we get to what our objective is to kill Nehemiah. We want to stop this work. That's the matter of the heart. Then they say, so how do we go about doing this? I know, let's pretend that we're going to send a letter to the king of Persia, and let's add in all the stuff that would really raise the ire of a king. And it would also look like, wow, not only are these people looking to do this, but somebody that the king trusted at one point is the guy who's the lead of wanting to do this. So let's make no mistake here. This is If everything worked exactly like they wanted to, and even if Nehemiah never came to them, if they were to send this letter and it had the intended result, it would have absolutely blown up on Nehemiah, and they weren't in any place to put up a fight against the Persians. So this is an existential thing. It's a threat to their very existence, and we shouldn't diminish that. But at the same time, we realize that they weren't going to have any power to do anything because a few things. God had brought them back to this place. But Nehemiah is also a guy who's very much clued in to the God who has sent him to do this thing. He's sensitive to the work that is there. He doesn't get distracted, and they stay on task. And so in the back of his mind, and he's going to make a mention of this, in the back of his mind, and this is a really good thing for us to remember as well, if God has tasked you for something, then that means that God tasks you not so that you will fail halfway through it or only partially complete the job. If he tasks you to do something, he knows the beginning of it and he knows how it is supposed to conclude. It's not something that is hidden from him. So it is incumbent upon the believer to say, if the Lord has tasked me for this, he has the end result also in mind from the moment that I first hear of it and he first moves on my life. So Nehemiah, knowing this, God sent me to rebuild the walls. We're brought back into the land because he promised we'd be back into the land. And we are here to put things back the way that they're supposed to be. Proper temple worship, not intermingling with the nations as we had done before. God had told them not to do that before they even entered the land. That was done during the times of Moses. Don't have any interaction with the people of the nations. So all of those kind of things. Nehemiah knows that that is the ultimate end result here. So anything that would slow down that work, anything that would in any way hinder it, had to be just put aside. There's no way that he was going to entertain any of it. So again, the application part to us. If we know that God has tasked us for something, we stay with it until it's complete. And if we have opposition, expect it. Opposition is just part of it. We have to assume that that's going to happen. You don't take it personal. You don't retaliate. You don't ask for revenge. This is the Lord's deal. So not only once, but now a second time, we're going to see in very direct language where Nehemiah looks at his enemies and then he calls on God. God, you repay them. You remember the things that they had done. I'm not going to take it upon myself. And I see so many people, pastors in particular, who have things that are done against them that take it personal and then they retaliate. And God would never have them do that. It only damages the people and the collateral damage. You may have people in your church, if your pastor's listening to this, that are subversive. You might have all of that. But the corrective measures are pretty minimal that you can do. Yeah, sometimes even down to some of the most vile things. We saw Paul deal with it in 1 Corinthians 5. You're going to ask a person to leave the church because their sin is so rampant. But at the same time, it's not for us to retaliate over personality things. We should be seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, I can probably make this problem worse in a dozen different ways. So, Lord, would you take care of it instead? And would you give me the wisdom on how to know what I'm supposed to do from day to day as you work these things out? But I've watched a lot of people crash and burn by doing it in reverse order. They do whatever seems right in their own mind, and then they ask God to bail them out when the whole thing blows up on them. So really, really important stuff that's here. Application part. So he's a great case study in how to handle such occasions. Verse 8. So then I sent to him saying, no such things as you say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. The heart is the beginning of it. Remember what Jesus said, that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So that's just one of the ways of saying then action ensues. And so you're going to say something. In this case, your mind is going to concoct. We have an evidence of it here. Your heart is wicked and diseased and evil. And so you're going to devise some kind of a plan to stop the work. All right. So verse 9. For they all were lying. I'm sorry. Verse 9. For they all were rather trying to make us afraid, saying, their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. So that was their objective. Here Nehemiah is giving his commentary. Why did they do this? Because in their own minds, this is what they thought. Their hands, The enemies against them were speaking of the Jews and saying, if we can discourage them, their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. That's the first of two very, very important things that Nehemiah says here. He's going to get to them later, but right now he sees this. Here's all the opposition. So rather than him take matters into his own hands, he first of all shows what exactly he had done, and what his way of dealing with this was, Lord, would you strengthen my hand? So that would be, help me to complete the work. Part of that helping to complete the work, as we'll see here, God was showing him things along the line. So he was in communication, if you will, in whatever manner. God was revealing things along the road, so he wasn't distracted. He didn't fall into the multiple traps that were set in front of him, and he acknowledges that. Now, here would be the question. Does he say, strengthen my hand, and that's what led to all of the things being exposed to him? Because he says this before all of it was being was shown to him to be the fraud that was there. And the answer to that very simply is yes. It wouldn't be the first time he would have asked this. He's asked for it before. God, lead us and guide us. And we're only given little details. Remember, what has already taken place from the time that he got there. It's 60 days later. That's really what encompasses these 5 chapters. So a lot of things happen in a 60-day, just short of a 60-day period. We just have the big highlights of this. So I'm sure that it was an all-day, everyday thing as Nehemiah was thinking about it. Lord, strengthen my hand, help us. We see that there are times when it was overwhelming to them. And Nehemiah would have come before the Lord, God, help us, strengthen us, encourage us. And you would see that it would have that direct effect. So I'm sure that he was quite accustomed to this, saying things like you see there at the second part of verse 9, now therefore, God, strengthen my hands. Now, verse 10, afterward, I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Methabel, who was a secret informer. So this Shemaiah, we don't know much about the person. There's not much that's said here. But we know this, that at first it seems as though he's somewhat trusted because he does have an interaction. Look at what it says there. Afterward, I came to the house of. So he wouldn't go to where Tobiah was. He wouldn't go to where Sanballat and Geshem and any of those other people. He wouldn't go to where they were. But in this case, in very close proximity to the temple, they must have been in the same complex, because you see this Shemaiah is trying to say, this is too open, it's too exposed, let's go inside the temple. So clearly their proximity seems to be, it's very, very close by. He says to him, let's read verse 10, the whole thing. Afterward I came to the house of Shemaiah, and it says, but here's what he knows about him. This man was a secret informer. So secret at this point to Nehemiah, but later on comes to know exactly who he was. Now, here's how again, this whole thing goes on. So he says to him, let's remember a couple of things. Nehemiah absolutely will not go to see them, doesn't take the bait of the threat to the king, although it's still out there, it's lingering, it hasn't been brought to anything, but I'm sure that Nehemiah knows this is still a potential. Now somebody from within, these are from the children of Israel, these are the people he should have trust and confidence in, and yet here in his own repetition of the history says, oh, by the way, this guy was hired, he was an informer. And it says, and here's what he told me, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. Indeed, at night they will come to you and they will kill you. They are coming to kill you. Here's what basically, remember, this is now the third attempt. Come and see us. No, I won't come and see you. Well, we're going to send this letter. You're lying. And this is something you've concocted because of your evil heart. Third attempt. How do we stop the work? Let's take one of his own people from their own nation, and let's get him to have Nehemiah buy into the idea of hiding himself under the guise that we're coming to kill him. Now, Nehemiah, once again, God is clearly showing him these things. But again, he's writing this to us after the events. But in real time, he clearly he has so many ways that he could go wrong, and yet consistently, over and over and over again, he makes the correct decision. Of course, this is what I would expect. I'm sure you do too. you would expect this because this is the man that God chose to send. He has a complete task for him to do, and this man is sensitive to the things of God, so he's going to be a person that God can depend on in this case. So really, really important. So this is what's thrown out there to him. And then he says in verse 11, so I said to him, should such a man as I flee? And who is there such as I am, who would go into the temple to save his own life? I will not go in. Now, there's a lot of question as to the fullness of his lineage. Could he have actually gone in there? Again, it's interesting to read different people's views of this, but that doesn't seem to be the motivation. It's not about, well, it's not right, it's not lawful for me to be there at that particular time. Even if he is of a priestly line, they're not always going to be there doing the things that they're doing. And so there's groups of people that are able to do the things that they do, and they do it in succession, but by appointments of weeks at a time. So there's a lot of debate on this, but I think that we can look at this. It isn't anything about, can I be there lawfully? Rather, is this something that I should do considering what everybody knows about me? How would this look if the person who has said, we're here because God has brought us here? I'm doing the work that I'm doing because God has given us this work. Remember, he's already said this. You have no part in this. He has said this to these same people. You have no part in this. We don't care about what you think. You're not from us. You're not among us. You're not our people. So you have nothing in this. We trust in the Lord. He's the one who has sent us back. Okay, great. That's good. That's him planting his flag early on. Now what would it look like if you could say, all right, great. Well, we're going to come kill you. Oh, and then he runs away in fear. So here he says, well, how would that look if I'm a guy sent by the king and some of the locals make a threat against me, so I go running for the protection of another place? I'm not going to do it, because it would be a reproach. It would be something that the people would look at and say, sure, he talks a good game, but just threaten his life and it's over. He'll go ahead and cower like all the rest of them. So this is their wager. We will get him to do something, and if they can't outright kill him, how about we just subvert him in the eyes of the people and weaken him so much that they won't do what he's directing them to do? Again, think of how many different ways these guys are trying to get to the same place, and how, you can say it's kind of wicked and ingenious at the same time. But let's try everything that we can think of to try to stop the work. This is what I meant when I said, when we opened, that it's one thing to see how a particular matter would be taken care of, but if you can beat the devil on one thing one day, or if the devil is defeated by the Lord, obviously, in your situation, don't think he's taking tomorrow off. It's like, okay, that didn't work, but he's got lots of time, and he's patient, and he hates you. And so the idea that he'll be back tomorrow, count on it. Every single day. This is the footing upon which we stand every single day. It is a never-ending 24/7, 365 battle that we have, spiritually speaking. Don't let it bother you. It's part of being one of God's kids. You're going to be hated. So whether directly by the devil or the people that he stirs up. Here's a great example. Now, so he says this, then, it was at that time, though he's speaking about it as though this already happened a long time ago, but it was right then. So this is a really cool narrative here. It was at that time that I perceived that God had not sent him at all, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. Again, God revealed that to him. Why would he ask me to do this thing? It doesn't seem necessarily bad. I mean, think about it. This is a guy, if it's a trusted person calls you to his house and you go there, hey, I've got information. They're coming to kill you tonight. Let's you and me retire to the safety of the temple. And all at this time, he really sees it. God opens his eyes to it. Because first of all, he says, look, I'm not going to dishonor God and what he's called me to do. I'm going to trust him to do it. And God opens his eyes. This guy was just a plant. He's someone that had been hired by the same people that have been threatening you a whole bunch of different ways, who, if you had done the first thing that they asked, you probably wouldn't even be here now. So, now for this reason, verse 13, for this reason, this very same reason, this was the only reason that he was hired, was for this. It's for this that he was hired, that I should be afraid and act that way and sin. The sin, what would that be? Because, again, trying to preserve your life's not a sin, but the disobedience, trust me if God's telling you I'll take care of your needs? So there's a lot implied here, or at least what he thought, is that if I was to take matters into my own hands, it wouldn't be trusting in the Lord, and that would be a disobedient thing. So again, what a marvelous walk with God this man has. So he says, let's just read verse 13, the whole thing. For this reason he was hired, that I should be afraid and act that way and to sin, so that they might have cause an evil report, that they might reproach me. So again, the evil report. Especially if they didn't come to do any of that, then they could say, man, this guy only heard that we've got some kind of problem. Imagine if you're those guys. You get him to take the bait and he does that whole thing. What would you start to say to the people? This guy's paranoid. He's thinking that somehow we were coming to kill him. We weren't coming to kill him. I don't know who's giving him that information, but we don't want anything to do. Even something that we weren't even planning on, he got so afraid of it, he went ahead and ran into the temple. So much for his trust in God. Does that sound familiar? So how many times does the devil, again, if we're going to do an application on this, put something before us to put us to flight and get us to run away? That's where persecution comes from. That's what that word persecution means, is to put to flight, make us run out of fear. And so the world would love that. Do and say things against us that would really make us stop trusting in God, take matters into our own hands to preserve ourselves in whatever way. And the world could say, oh, I thought you were a Christian, you believed and you trusted in God, and yet you took your matters into your own hands. You see the problem with it? So it's nothing new. Verse 14. My God. Remember, let's read again the last part of verse 9. Therefore, God, strengthen my hands. So that's where he says, supply me with what I need. Get me through this, whatever it may be. So the strengthening of his hand is, yeah, it's building the walls, but the strengthening of his hand is really help me to know what to do. And we see that God does that profoundly. So, verse 14, my God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat according to these their works, and to the prophetess Noadiah, and to the rest of the prophets who would have made me to be afraid. So it wasn't just Sanballat, it wasn't just Tobiah, but there are apparently a whole bunch of other people who are all saying the same things. Take that in for a second, because that means that if you will, you want to call it a conspiracy or whatever you want to, had really gone through a lot of people. They were all saying the exact same things. Meanwhile, he just says, look, man, I just want to build a wall. I want to make this place defensible. Why is this such an issue? Well, obviously, there's got to be more going on here in the spiritual side of it than just people who don't like Nehemiah. There's a much greater thing going on here. Verse 15. So, here's what he's able to say. All of that intrigue and all the rest of it, look at what happened. So, the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. So, less than 2 months. About a week less than 2 months. So, the magnitude of this had to be incredible. Now, again, let's remember, the walls were not completely taken apart from beginning to end. How big it was. It's not that everyone, it had just been breached in a number of different places and there were no gates. It was easily accessible. Anybody could come and go as they pleased and do pretty much whatever they wanted to. So however big the breaches in the wall were, nonetheless, this is an impressive feat. So all of this subversive work was going on, yet nonetheless, within less than 2 months, we had built this. So this is really just kind of a culmination of being able to say the resistance that we had was formidable, and we come to find out that the people involved with it were more than just Sanballat, Tobiah, and the people who were non-Jews. This had gone into some of the nobles and some of the highest ranking people there. That tells you how corrupt this was. So, verse 16. So it happened when all of our enemies heard of it, and all the nations around us saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that the work was done by our God. 2 parts going on here. The idea of them being discouraged in their own eyes, that basically means we have failed. And they realized we gave it our best shot and it didn't work. In fact, everything that we tried to stand against has not only taken place, but more impressively than anybody could have seen. It created in them an enormous amount of discouragement. But see, there's this added element to it. It's not just discouragement because they failed, but they realized that supernaturally behind the scenes, that God was the one who was doing the work, and he was the one who was guiding Nehemiah. There's just no way around it. So it's such an impressive, the entire story is just so incredible that the nations who don't even want to recognize the God of Israel see his hand upon them, and that this work was discouraging to them. Remember, the same people who wanted to be the ones to discourage the work so thoroughly that it never took place are the same ones who, when they saw it completed, recognized God's done something miraculous, and they turned out to be the ones who were discouraged. So, application. If we are going to be doing what we know that God wants us to do, have to expect opposition. What happens when opposition comes? Lord, help. What do I do? Give me direction, because I don't see what's going on behind the scenes. I can only see the big picture stuff, but give me wisdom, give me understanding. Please lead me and guide me. We'd be praying all kinds of things like that. What we want to see at the end of it is that God steps up to do exactly that, guides us through the whole thing, brings the work to a total completion, confounding those people who would stand against us, and they would have but one conclusion. God stepped in an intermediary as a person who just went on their behalf and did all of these things. So really, really cool. Verse 17, also, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them. So these are people in the highest levels of the governing people, or the heads of tribes, the heads of the people. Many of those people were corrupted by it, and they were feeding intelligence back and forth. So everything that Nehemiah and the people who were faithful to him that were being done, all of that was being communicated back and forth. Of course, Nehemiah can only say this because he knows this after the fact. So he's speaking about something that was historically found out. But when you start to say, gosh, even the nobles, this is just betrayal. And so these are people who should have the most to gain by being God's people back in the land, and yet they're working with the enemies against the work. That just shows you how corrupt it had become. Again, these are people who went through 70 years of captivity and total dismantling of their nation at the hands of the Babylonians. Now under the Persians, they're sent back, and already they are corrupt. The last thing I'll say on this, because again, we hear this so often in the churches today, and it makes me crazy, that when we start to talk about looking at the condition of the church in the modern days, and I do this a lot. Those of you who know me best know that I always want to look at church culture things and what's happening in the church. And when it's out of balance, I want to bring note to it, and I want to make sure that people are aware that these things are taking place. There are many in the church that say, well, that causes division, and you're just doing this and you're doing that. You're being a Pharisee, or this, whatever the accusation is. Okay, great, whatever. But at the same time, I want to remember that corruption is something that happens, and it's been happening all throughout history. Who are the people that should be least corrupt in this whole part of the world? The Jews. Why? Because they were already displaced from the land because of their disobedience to God's law. So who should be the last people that you would see? The heads of the tribes, the heads of the families, the nobles, the people who are the upper part of society. And they're every bit as complicit in this as anyone else. So if that kind of corruption can happen, I give the example a lot of times of the churches in the book of Revelation. 5 of the 7 have systemic problems. Some are into full-blown apostasy. And that's only 60 years after the resurrection. So the idea that the people of God can be corrupted over time is just simply a matter of historical record over and over and over and over again. Look at Paul's writings. They were always having some level of correction to the churches that are being addressed. So the idea that somehow we shouldn't be calling out error is going to be the natural tendency of man. Let's just be honest about it. So there's this back and forth between these heads of the people and of Tobiah. For many in Judah were pledged to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah. And so Arah, you can find out, came back with Zerubbabel. So this is a Jewish family that came back from the captivity. And remember when Ezra got there, why are you guys intermarrying? We're going to bring disaster on us for doing the exact same thing. Tobiah has married in a couple removed, but he's married into the people. And so they're imagine this, the people there in Israel that are Jewish in descent have more to do with Tobiah than they do with Nehemiah. And these are the people that are complicit with sharing information back and forth and thwarting the work. So many in Judah were pledged to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, the son of Jehohanan, and he had married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. This is just to give the family lineage so you can trace it all the way back to when they came back in the first of the captivity, the first wave of this with Zerubbabel a long time before this. And this verse 19, also they reported his good deeds before me, and they reported my words to him. Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. So in one more layer of this, these very same people who should have been part of the work along with me and should have been very careful about these kind of things, these are the people who were trying to tell me what a great guy Tobiah was. Everything that he had seen to that point said otherwise, and yet he had people from his own group giving, kind of running PR for Tobiah, who was really looking to destroy the work. That just shows you how crafty and how good the devil is at what he does. And it also shows you how easily corrupted people should be. If ever there were some who should never have done anything subversive towards Nehemiah, it is these people. And yet these were the people, had they been able to accomplish what they wanted to, would have been doing the bidding of a man who was hostile to God and to his people, and it would have been his own people who would have been a part of the intrigue. Again, hard to believe. Do yourself, the favor of looking at this and say, is there an equivalent to this? What would it be like in modern day? And it would be like people within the church colluding with people in the world who hate what we believe as believers, and they would have some kind of interaction with people who hate us to help to bring us down. Hard to believe, but it happens. And it's just kind of a human nature kind of a thing. You get people who are subversives in the church because they can't stand the truth, and they will make allegiances and alliances with other people. So pretty sad. Again, it's the condition of the church, because look at how much stuff is being accepted as far as the church is concerned that God hates. So God hates murder, and so abortion is not really a question. Abortion is obviously something God would absolutely forbid. And yet, we have people in some churches saying it's no big deal. When it comes to same-sex marriage, when it comes to things like sexuality and matters like that, God has already set forward what is acceptable to him. It's one man, one woman committed to one another, and it is heterosexual. It is not male with male. It's not female with female. That is all through the scriptures. And so, especially as far as the law is concerned, people governed by God, living according to his law, it was absolutely forbidden. And the price for breaking that law, it was a death sentence to them. But again, that's how it was for people living under the law. That was the penalty to them. God didn't ask them to go out and wipe out everybody over those kinds of things. It is, if you are going to live among the people under the law, this is what is supposed to be, and this is what is acceptable in the ideal situation. So once again, that has not changed in the New Testament. So once again, the church has to know God's mandate as far as what is acceptable and not acceptable to him. We do not have anything in the New Testament telling us that in the church there is that same kind of disciplinary things as there was under the law. The morality stands. The penalty is different. So real important for us to know those types of things as well. I've been asked to do something on the talking points as I keep saying I'm going to do this. We have so many things going on. We've got so many things of busyness to do. But we'll do something on the cultural things happening in the world and how they're affecting the church. We'll be doing that in an upcoming one. Last couple of things as we close. We have a trip going to Israel. That's going to happen in March 15th through the 27th of next year, 2023. And I have the details on it. If it's something that you are interested in, then please contact us and I can send you the details on that. We also have a newsletter I'm working on right now, some of the content of it. Much is happening in the world. So You can reach us through the email at oldpaththeology.net, the website, and send us an email. We can add you to the list. And if you have any questions about any of the things that we cover in any of our studies, or any questions that you have basically just on biblical matters that you'd like to ask, and you might not have access to a pastor, please send them. I'd love to be able to work through them with you and make sure that you have an answer as best I can give it. So with all that said, we'll pick up at chapter 7 next week, and pray that God really blesses the time that you spend in His Word and that you grow as a result of that by the work of the Holy Spirit.